The 7 off the same boat, all telling me they didn't know each other. That's the part I couldn't let go of. I was working the late shift at the passenger terminal in Seattle, third week of September 2020. Traffic was still gutted from COVID. Some nights I'd process maybe 40 people over a full shift, mostly crew off cargo vessels, a handful of foreign nationals on the rare passenger runs that were still operating under special permits. The booth smelled like Lysol wipes and coffee gone cold. My mask fogged up the top of my glasses every time I leaned forward. The vessel that night was a small charter out of Vancouver, 60-something passengers total, mostly returning residents. Nothing special about the manifest. I remember the harbor lights on the water, the way the fog was sitting low over the piers, and how my back was killing me from the chair. The line moved slow, then the 7 came through, not together exactly, spaced out. 2 in a row, then a gap, then another one, then 3 near the middle, then the last one at the very back of the group. If you weren't watching for it, you wouldn't have caught it, but I've been doing this 11 years, and I watch. The first one was a man, mid-30s, dark blue jacket, backpack, passport in his hand before I even asked. That's normal. What wasn't normal was the passport itself. Brand new, no stamps, not a single entry, not a single exit. Issued 8 months ago. People travel for the first time. It happens. I asked him the standard question. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. Fine. I stamped him and waved him on. He said thank you in accented English and moved to baggage. Second guy came up maybe 40 seconds later. Different build, different clothes, older, gray at the temples, new passport, no stamps. Issued about the same time as the first one. Different country of issue, but the same clean sheet. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. Same word, same intonation. Not similar, the same. I looked at him a beat longer than I needed to. He smiled with his eyes above the mask, polite, patient. I stamped him and let him go. By the time the third one showed up, I had my head down like I wasn't paying attention, and I was watching the line in my peripheral. Woman this time, late 20s, tan coat, quiet, new passport, different country again. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. That was when I felt it. Not fear. Something colder, more like recognition, like when you're reading a form and you catch a typo that shouldn't be there, and then you look again and there are 5 of them. I kept processing the line. Between each of the 7, there were legitimate travelers. A Filipino grandmother visiting her daughter in Renton, a Canadian engineer on a work permit, a college kid who dropped his phone on my counter and apologized 4 times. Normal people, normal answers, purpose of your visit, seeing family, work, school, a wedding in Bellingham, real answers with hesitation and detail in them. Then the next one of the 7 would step up and say the word. Tourism. Just the word. No plans, no cities, no, I'm going to see Pike Place. Just the word, and then quiet. The 4th was a younger man, maybe 25. His hands were on the counter, and I could see he'd been chewing the skin around his thumb raw. That was the first thing that didn't fit the pattern. The others were composed. He was leaking a little. I asked him where he was staying. He said the name of a hotel downtown. I asked him for how long. He hesitated a full second. 2 weeks. You have a return ticket? He did. It was on his phone. He showed me. It was clean. I stamped him. Number 5 was older, a woman in her 50s, and she made a mistake so small that if I hadn't been counting, I would have missed it. When she stepped up to the booth, she glanced back over her shoulder, not at the line behind her. She looked toward the seating area near baggage claim, where the first man in the blue jacket was still standing, not doing anything, not looking at his phone, just standing there with his backpack at his feet. She looked at him for less than a second, and then she was back on me with her passport out. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. I asked her what she planned to do in the city. She said, see the sights. I asked which sights. She said, everything. I stamped her. Number 6 was a man about my age. And this is going to sound stupid, but I remember he was wearing new shoes. Not just clean, new. The soles were white and unmarked, like out of the box. He was carrying 1 small duffel. 2 weeks of tourism, 1 duffel, new shoes, blank passport. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. Same word. Same flat little pause after. By this point I had a decision to make. I could keep processing them and flag it upstairs after my shift and let somebody else pull the video, or I could pull the 7th and hold the group. Holding people slows the entire line. It's paperwork. It's a supervisor call. If you're wrong, you've hassled 7 legal travelers, and you're going to hear about it. If you're right and you let them walk, they're gone into the city inside an hour. The 7th came up, youngest of them, maybe 22. He was the one at the very back, and by the time he reached me, his forehead was damp above the mask. Not sweating, exactly. Damp. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. I said, "Sir, I need you to step over to the secondary screening area, please. It'll just be a few minutes." His eyes went to my hands, then to my badge, then past my shoulder to the door behind me. He didn't argue. He nodded and walked where I pointed. I hit the button under the counter and got the supervisor on the radio. I told her I had 7 off the same manifest that I wanted held. She didn't ask why over the radio. She just said, "Copy." And 30 seconds later, 2 officers were walking the floor, pulling the other 6 out of the terminal before any of them made it to the exit. The first one, the blue jacket, saw the officer approaching, and I watched his face. Nothing dropped. He didn't run, he didn't argue. He picked up his backpack, said something short and polite, and walked with the officer toward the room. That was almost worse than if he'd bolted. He'd been ready. I called Marisa. She worked immigration enforcement out of the federal building, and she owed me a favor from a case 2 years back. It was past 1 in the morning. She answered on the 4th ring, voice full of sleep, and I told her what I had. 7 passports. Different countries of issue. All new. All with the same one-word answer. One of them looking at another in the seating area. I told her I hadn't articulated a specific violation yet. I just had a feeling, and enough procedural cover to hold them for a secondary. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't run their biometrics through the standard system yet. Wait for me." I didn't ask why. I figured she had a reason. She walked in at 10 past 2 with a laptop bag and coffee for both of us. We started with the 2 who seemed off to me from the floor, the young one at the back, the older woman who had glanced. Marisa ran their prints and their photos through a database I don't have access to on the booth terminal. The younger one came back with a name that wasn't on his passport, not a criminal record hit, just a mismatch. The face and the prints belonged to a person who had applied for a visa under a different identity 18 months earlier, out of a 3rd country, and been denied. The older woman came back with a similar mismatch, different original identity, same pattern, 2 out of 7. That was enough to lean on all of them. Marisa pulled the rest and worked them one at a time in the interview room down the hall. I stayed at my booth because the line hadn't stopped and I still had a job to do. Every 20 minutes or so, she'd come out and get water and update me in 3-sentence bursts. By the time my shift ended at 6, she had a rough shape of what it was, not the whole picture. That took weeks and a lot of people I never met. But the shape of it was that these 7 had been moved as a group through a chain of intermediaries, coached on documents, coached on answers, coached on how to look like they weren't together. They'd been told to say one word at the booth and nothing else. Whoever ran them had picked the word because it opens the fewest follow-up questions. Every real tourist has a plan. These didn't need one. 2 of the 7 were traveling on documents that weren't theirs at all. The other 5 were traveling on their own documents with legends built around them. The whole thing unspooled from that first mismatch on the young one at the back. It went to immigration court. I don't know the full outcome for every person in that group, and I never asked. My part ended in that room at 6 in the morning with Marisa closing her laptop and saying, "Good catch, really good catch." A month later, I got a letter through inter-office mail. Official commendation. It sat on my kitchen counter for a week before I put it in a drawer. The thing that still sits with me isn't the size of the operation, it's how close it came to walking through. If the 5th one hadn't looked back at the first one for that half second, if the 7th one hadn't been sweating, if I'd been half an hour further into my shift and tired, they would have all 7 cleared the booth in under 12 minutes and been in cars on I-5 before Marisa was out of bed. The word was what got them. Same word, same way, 7 times. Whoever coached them thought that was the safe answer. They were almost right. The call came in as a routine follow-up on a smoke alarm complaint. 2nd week of November, Detroit. One of those days where the light gives up around 4 in the afternoon, and you can smell the river even a mile inland. I was already behind on my route, so I figured I'd swing through this last building and clock out. The building sat off Michigan Avenue, west side, a 4-story walk-up, with the kind of brick that's been painted over so many times, it looks like scar tissue. The landlord's management company had been cited twice that year already. Nothing serious. A blocked stairwell once. An expired extinguisher in the laundry room. Small stuff. The kind of thing you write up, mail out, and forget. I parked on the street and stood on the sidewalk for a minute, warming my hands in the pockets of my work jacket. There was a kid's tricycle chained to the railing outside the front door. Chained, like someone was worried about it. I remember thinking that was a lot of trouble for a $3 toy from a yard sale. The complaint was for Unit 3B, 3rd floor, north side. The tenant on the lease was one guy. According to the paperwork, the property manager emailed me that morning. Rented for 2 years, never a complaint, rent always on time. I took the stairs because the elevator had a paper sign taped to it that just said, "Out, no date, no signature." The stairwell smelled like fried onions and cigarettes and something else, wet cardboard maybe. Somewhere above me a baby was crying and someone was hushing it in a language I didn't recognize. I knocked at 3B and waited. Standard 3 knocks, pause, badge held up at eye level for the peephole. That's the drill. You don't want to look like a cop, but you also don't want to look like you're hiding anything. Nothing. I knocked again and called through the door. "Fire safety inspector, just here for a walkthrough. 10 minutes tops." I heard movement then. Not one person moving. Several. It's a specific sound when more than a couple of people try to be quiet at the same time in a small space. The floor shifts in patterns. Doors close in overlapping little clicks. A chair scrapes and gets caught halfway. The door opened maybe 6 inches. A man looked out at me. Late 30s, tired eyes, a thin gold chain around his neck. He had a dish towel in one hand like he'd been drying his hands when I knocked, only the towel was folded neat, not damp. He hadn't been drying anything. "Sorry," he said. "I was sleeping. Come in, come in." He said it warmly, but he didn't step back to let me pass right away. He stood in the doorway a second longer than felt natural, and I understood, without wanting to understand yet, that he was giving somebody time. I stepped inside. The apartment was clean. That was the first thing I noticed. Too clean for a guy living alone in a 2-bedroom, which is what the lease said. The kitchen counter was wiped down and empty except for a big rice cooker and a stack of paper plates. No mail, no keys, no half-drunk coffee. Nothing that says one person lives here and forgets things. But the sink had dishes drying in the rack. I counted without meaning to. 9 plates, 11 cups, a pot big enough to boil laundry in. "I'll start in the kitchen if that's okay," I said. "Just need to check the smoke detector in the range." Of course. I could hear him behind me while I worked. He wasn't moving. He was standing very still, just inside the front door, watching. I tested the smoke alarm above the stove. It chirped, then went off proper, loud enough that I felt him flinch, even though I couldn't see him. Somewhere down the hallway, past the kitchen, something small hit the floor. A soft cloth sound. Someone had shifted their weight and knocked something off a bed, maybe. The man didn't react. He was pretending he didn't hear it, which meant he had heard it, which meant he knew what it was. "I'll look at the bedrooms next," I said. "Both empty," he said quickly. "Just me. I use one for storage. I still need to check the detectors, building code." He nodded like he'd been expecting me to say that, and he walked ahead of me down the hallway, which is not what people usually do. Usually they hang back. He wanted to be first through every door. The first bedroom had a mattress on the floor, not a bed, a mattress with a folded blanket at the foot, so neat it looked staged. The closet door was closed. I opened it to check for the detector wiring, and there were coats. 7, 8 coats. Men's coats, women's coats, a small pink one with a fake fur hood that would fit a child maybe 6 years old. The hangers were all pushed to one side like somebody had gone through them fast. I didn't say anything. I checked the detector. It worked. I wrote it down. The second bedroom door was closed. He put his hand on the knob and hesitated. "My cousin," he said. "She sleeps in the day. She works nights. I just need 30 seconds. He opened it. The room was dark. The blinds were down and there was a shape under a blanket on a mattress on the floor, turned toward the wall. Very still. Too still. Nobody sleeps that still when a stranger walks in and turns on the ceiling light. I looked at the detector. Battery pull tab still in it. Never activated. I wrote that down. When I turned to leave, I glanced at the closet. The door was open about an inch. Inside, past the crack, I could see the toe of a work boot. Just the toe. Standing upright, on a foot, not lying on its side the way a boot does when nobody's wearing it. I did not open that closet. I have thought about that decision maybe 100 times since. I did not open the closet because I already knew, and because the man behind me already knew that I knew, and because whoever was in the closet was not dangerous to me. They were afraid of me. That was the thing that was clear from the moment the door opened. Nobody in that apartment was afraid I would hurt them. They were afraid of what I could set in motion. I went back to the living room. He followed. I took my time with the extinguisher check, the outlet load, the window egress. I asked him questions I didn't need answers to. How long had he lived there? Did the heat work? Had the alarm in the hallway ever gone off? While I talked, I counted. 2 behind the couch, from the small sound of a knee readjusting on a wood floor. 1 in the bathroom, from the way the door was pulled almost shut but not latched, and the fact that the light underneath it kept flickering as someone shifted their weight in front of it. The 1 under the blanket in the second bedroom, and the 1 in the closet. 2 more in what had to be a pantry off the kitchen, because when I ran the range hood, I heard someone cough and try to swallow it. The man himself. That was 8. Minimum. Then, walking back toward the door, I glanced into the first bedroom again and saw that the coats in the closet had shifted forward maybe 2 inches. There was space behind them now that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Space, and shoes on the floor of that space, arranged in pairs. Small shoes, adult, but small. 4 pairs, maybe 5. 12. I got to 12, and I stopped counting because I didn't want to know if there were more. At the door, I turned around and looked at him properly for the first time. He was maybe a foot shorter than me. He had flour on the cuff of his sweatshirt, which meant somebody had been cooking when I knocked, and somebody had wiped down the kitchen in the 60 seconds it took me to get up the stairs. "I'll be in touch with the property manager about the violations," I said. "Battery pulls on 2 detectors. Blocked egress in the 2nd bedroom. That's what goes in my report." He was watching my mouth like he was trying to read it in case he'd missed something. "That's all," he said. "That's all that's in my report." He understood me. I saw it land. He didn't thank me. He didn't smile. He nodded once, small, and closed the door before I was all the way to the stairs. I sat in my car for a long time before I turned the key. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't scared exactly. I was doing math. I was thinking about the pink coat with the fur hood. I was thinking about the mattress on the floor and how the blanket at the foot was folded neat because somebody had folded it every morning for months. 12 people in a 3-bedroom, 1 kitchen exit, 1 fire escape that I knew from the outside was rusted at the 2nd floor bracket. If a grease fire went up in that kitchen at 3 in the morning, half of them would not make it to the street. That was my job. That part. The rest wasn't my job. I drove home. I wrote the report that night. Cited the violations, cited the landlord, gave him 30 days per state code. I did not write down the count. I did not write down the coats or the boot in the closet or the way the man had stood in his own doorway like a wall. I have a friend from college who does policy work for a nonprofit up in Hamtramck. Migrant labor stuff mostly, wage theft, housing. 2 days later, I met her for coffee at a place on Caniff, and I told her, without names, that a building at a certain address might be worth someone knocking on doors. Not officials, someone with Arabic and Spanish and a grandmother's kind of patience. She wrote the address on a napkin and put the napkin in her wallet. I never went back to that building on the job. My route rotates. Somebody else did the reinspection 30 days out and the violations were cleared. New detectors. Egress opened up. Signed off. About 6 weeks after that, my friend texted me a picture of a moving truck parked in front of a small house on the east side. No caption. I didn't ask. The tenant on the lease at 3B moved out sometime that winter. The property manager told me over the phone, annoyed, like it was my fault. I said sorry to hear it and hung up and stood in my kitchen with the phone still in my hand for a while. I think about the boot in the closet more than I should. Not because it scared me, because of how still the foot inside it stayed while I stood 2 feet away and pretended not to see. The call came in a little before 4 in the morning, which isn't unusual for me, but the drive was almost 2 hours out into ranch country, and that already put the day in the wrong category. Late May in that part of Montana still has bite. Frost on the truck, breath in the air, the last of the snow sitting in shaded ditches like it forgot to leave. I do outside work for 3 counties. When somebody dies alone, and there's no obvious wound and no obvious crime, I'm the guy they pull out of bed. Most of the time it's exactly what it looks like. Old heart, bad heart, cold night, quiet exit. I write my line, sign my name, and drive home before the coffee at the gas station goes stale. The address was a single-story house at the end of a gravel road that stopped being maintained about a mile before you got there. No neighbors you could see, just fence line, cattle in the distance, and a stand of pines behind the property that looked older than the state. A sheriff's deputy was leaning on his cruiser when I pulled up. Young guy, maybe 25, coat too thin for the hour. "He's in the back bedroom," he said. "Cleaning lady found him. She comes Tuesdays. Anybody else been inside?" "Just her and me. I didn't touch anything past the door." I nodded and got my kid out of the passenger seat. The house smelled like every house I go into on this kind of call. Old cooking oil, dust that never left, a base note of something sweeter that was starting to turn. Not bad yet. He hadn't been there long, maybe a day and a half. The heat was cranked up, which didn't help. The man in the bedroom was named Wallace. That's what the deputy called him. 78, lived alone since his wife passed in the early 2000s, no kids in the state. He was on his back on top of the covers, one arm off the edge, mouth slightly open, flannel shirt and long johns and 1 wool sock. The other sock was on the floor near the dresser, like he'd been in the middle of getting undressed and sat down and never got back up. I did the walk around first. That's the part people don't understand about the job. Before I touch the body, I look at the room. The body tells you what killed a person. The room tells you what was happening in the last hour of their life. Wallace's bedside had a glass of water, half full. A blister pack of a statin and a beta blocker, both filled at the pharmacy in town 2 weeks earlier, a paperback with a bookmark maybe 40 pages in, reading glasses folded neatly, a remote for a small TV on the dresser, nothing knocked over, no sign of a struggle, no sign of a fall. His skin had the color you'd expect, fingernails clean, no froth, no bruising I could see with the light I had. I got closer, went through the routine, temperature, lividity, the eyes. Everything lined up with a quiet cardiac event sometime the previous evening, probably not long after supper. There was a plate in the kitchen sink with the remains of a pork chop and green beans on it. He had eaten, come back to the bedroom, started getting ready for bed, and his heart had stopped. Medically, it was one of the cleanest scenes I'd worked in a year. I was standing up, stretching my back, and that's when I noticed the dresser. The top of the dresser was one of those dark-stained wood surfaces that shows everything. Dust, oil from skin, old water rings, old furniture, the kind you inherit, and it was covered in prints. Not a couple. Not the smudges you get from a man who touches his own dresser every night of his life. It was covered. Palm prints, fingertips, the edge of a hand where somebody had leaned, layered on top of each other, like the surface of a table at a bar at closing time. I stood there for a second with my hands on my hips. Then I looked at the door frame. Prints, shoulder height, and again lower down. Then the wall next to the light switch, prints. Then the headboard of the bed, prints all along the top edge. I got out my flashlight and went slow along the room at an angle, the way you do when you want to catch what a straight beam misses. They were everywhere, on the mirror above the dresser, on the closet door, on the windowsill, on the inside of the window, which somebody had touched with a flat palm from the room side. I want to be clear about what I'm describing. It wasn't that the room was dirty, the house was tidy, the kitchen was tidy, the bathroom was tidy. Somebody, probably the cleaning lady, kept the place in decent order. This one room, though, this room had not been cleaned in a while, and every surface in it had been touched by a lot of hands. I got down on one knee near the dresser and looked at the prints at that angle, and that was when the second thing hit me. They were different sizes. Some of the palm prints on the top of the dresser were big, wide across, thick at the base of the thumb. A working man's hand, or a hand like a working man's? Fine, that could be Wallace. Then there were smaller ones, not child small, adult but narrower, longer fingers, less spread, a set on the mirror that were almost dainty, a woman's hand or a small man's. Then, on the door frame, a print with fingers so short and thick they looked wrong next to the rest. I counted at least 4 distinct hand sizes without trying. I stopped counting because I didn't want the number in my head. I stood up slowly. I didn't want to touch anything else. I looked at Wallace on the bed, flannel shirt, long johns, one sock, mouth open. Heart that gave out on a Tuesday evening after a pork chop. I want to say the room felt wrong at that point. It didn't. That's the part I keep coming back to. It felt like any bedroom in any old man's house, in any small town in that half of the state. The light through the curtain was gray and normal. Outside, a rooster was going somewhere, and a truck was moving on a road I couldn't see. Nothing about the room was theatrical. It was just a room where a lot of people had been. I did the rest of my job. Photographs, notes, the paperwork you have to fill out even when it's obvious. I bagged the pill packs and labeled them. I did not photograph the prints. Prints aren't my department. That's the sheriff's people, and only if there's reason to think a crime was committed. There wasn't. Not medically. I went out to the porch and wrote up my findings on the hood of my truck. Cause of death, arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, pending toxicology as a formality. Manner of death, natural. That's what it was. If you handed the same body to any pathologist in the country, they would sign the same line. The deputy came out with 2 cups of gas station coffee. He gave me one. It was the worst coffee I'd had in a month, which was saying something. "You done in there?" he asked. "I'm done." I didn't tell him about the prints. I wanted to tell somebody with more years on him. So I asked when the sheriff was getting in, and he said he was already at the office, so I drove into town before I drove home. The sheriff was a heavy guy in his late 50s with a mustache going white in the middle and staying brown at the edges. He'd been sheriff out there for a long time. I'd met him twice before, both on calls like this one. He waved me into his office, and I sat down and I told him. I told him about the dresser, about the door frame, about the windowsill and the mirror, about the different sizes. I told him I wasn't making any kind of ruling. I just thought somebody local should know that a lot of people had been in that bedroom with Wallace not long before he died, and none of it was in my report because none of it was mine to rule on. He listened without moving. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a second, and then he looked at me. "Yeah," he said. "Heard about that old man. He liked having guests." I waited. "He liked having a lot of guests," he said. He said it the way you'd say the man collected stamps, like it was a hobby he'd known about for years. No surprise in his face, no follow-up. He picked up a pen and clicked it twice against the edge of his desk and asked me if I wanted the coroner's copy faxed to my office or emailed. I said email. I stood up. I shook his hand. I left. I sat in the truck in the parking lot for a while before I started it. The sun was fully up by then. Kids were walking to school on the other side of the street. A woman was loading dog food into the back of a Subaru. I drove home the long way, on the 2-lane, and I kept turning the sheriff's phrasing over. Many guests, a lot of guests, in a house at the end of a gravel road with no neighbors in sight, belonging to a widower in his late 70s whose cleaning lady came once a week and knew nothing, where the surfaces of one room, and only one room, were covered in hands that were not his. I've thought about it a lot of ways since. Some of the ways I don't like. Some of them I like even less. The sheriff knew something. Whatever it wasn't the kind of something he was going to write down for a pathologist from 2 counties over. And whatever it wasn't a crime, or wasn't one he was calling a crime, because the file on Wallace was closed the day I signed it. Officially, the man died of a bad heart in his own bed on a Tuesday in May. That part is true. I know because I'm the one who wrote it. That's the end of this video. Thanks for being here. Drop a comment with the 4chan story you like the most, and if you're still in the mood for more unsettling stuff, check out the channel's other vids. Catch you soon. Bye.